like Lydia mentioned, I'm with Heritage Action for America. And just by way of introduction, who has heard of the Heritage Foundation? Just a show of hands. Most everyone. For those who are not aware of what the foundation does, they're a 501c3. They're a think tank. They do policy research and analysis. And they basically are able to educate the public in general about issues. And they work on all of the issues ranging from civil society, defense, to national security, economic issues, everything you can think of under the sun. There's an expert for it at the Heritage Foundation. And then Heritage Action for America, who I work for, we're a 501c4, and we were created by the foundation to be able to take that one extra step. The foundation can't lobby for or against certain pieces of legislation, whereas we are able to, thanks to our tax-exempt status as a C4. So we're able to go out and directly engage the public on specific bills that are before Congress and state legislatures. We're able to walk through what they do, what they say, and most importantly, be able to let you guys know, hey, this is a great bill, we should support this, or alternatively, this is a terrible bill, we should do something to try to be sure this doesn't go anywhere. And so that's really the goal of our organization, is to take the conservative policy priorities of the Heritage Foundation and make those a reality politically in Congress, at the federal level, and in state capitals around the country. We're in about 29 or so states that are working in state legislatures around the country right now, but we've always been working in the federal space as well. So many of you who may have been Sentinels, which I'll talk about really briefly in just a second, likely know that we've been around in the policy fight at the federal level since 2010. I know that Carolyn Garcia has been a Sentinel, what, 2013, 14?
2013.
13, so a decade now, which is awesome. I guess more than that, it's 2024 now, which it's hard to believe. So that's a little bit about the organization and what it is that we do. The way that we do that, we have grassroots activists all across the country who are active in their local communities. They are talking with their legislators. They are engaged. And most importantly, they know the policy and they know what to do action-wise to either advance or to slow good or bad policy regarding whatever that might be. We have a government relations team also at the federal level in DC, and then I'm also able to lobby directly here in the States and here in Georgia specifically. So we're able to pair that outside grassroots, which is the DNA of our organization. We're a grassroots organization first and foremost, with that inside kind of intel, and pair those together in a way that we're able to kind of have a feedback loop that helps us to know what's going on process-wise and policy-wise, so that we can all be on the same page and take the most effective action possible. Sentinels, which I mentioned briefly a second ago, are what we call our grassroots activists. It's people who are in the trenches with us. They are getting updates. They're on our regular strategy calls where we discuss what's going on at the federal level and at the state level. We have toolkits that Sentinels are able to take part in, and action centers that make it really easy to figure out who it is you should contact and give you a direct way to do that. We have a great network of conservatives. I know that you guys are really networked here. It's a great community of conservatives here. But in places where that may or may not be the case, Sentinel's a great way for other conservatives to come together instead of feeling alone in the fight. And then we do trainings and things. This is more of just a very brief 30,000-foot overview of the issues that's going on at the State House right now. But we can do in-depth trainings and things like that too. If you guys have groups that may be interested in learning how to testify before the state legislature, or how a bill becomes law, or anything tactical of that nature, happy to do trainings like that as well. There are 7 policy priorities. I mentioned before that Heritage is focused on basically everything, but we're honing in on 7 key policy priorities. And those are education and parental rights, life and family, election integrity, China, big tech, border and crime, and regulations and spending. In no particular order, they're all important to us. So we're working on those at the federal level and at the state level. And I'll talk about a couple of these today at the state level. The first of which is ranked choice voting. I know many of you are probably familiar with this issue. It's one of those things that has been tried in different places. Some people love it. A lot of people really don't love it at all. I'm here today just to tell you guys, our view is that ranked choice voting is the wrong choice. It's not one that we want to pursue. And there are a few reasons for that. So first and foremost, ranked choice voting is, how do I describe it? Think about ranking your favorite restaurant, for example. You can't just pick your favorite restaurant when somebody tells you, oh, what's your favorite place in town? You need to think of every restaurant in town, organize them in order of how much you like them, and be sure and answer for all of them, otherwise your opinion doesn't count at all. It's kind of silly when you think about it in terms of restaurants, but when you talk about voting, you go into the voting booth, we may be able to know or name the candidates in any particular race, but the average voter is not able to even know maybe even one candidate. They'd be lucky to know the person that they're planning to vote for when they step into the booth. In a lot of cases, unfortunately, ranked choice voting requires you to know all of the candidates, or at least make a determination of what order you like them in. And if you don't do that, then if it goes to multiple rounds of counting, your vote does not get counted, it gets thrown out. So the way it works, you cast a ballot just like we do now. They tally those, they add them up, and for races that have more than 2 candidates in them, they, after the first round, if no one gets to 50%, they kick out the person in last place and they recount based on second choice for the people who voted for that candidate who was kicked out. And then they repeat that process over and over again until they have a candidate who reaches a majority, which gets very complicated. It's really opaque. It's hard to, in fact, it's impossible really to go through and audit it. If you're going to try to go through and say, okay, well, this is how it happened with this order. It takes a very long time to count too, especially in races with many candidates. You're more or less relying on a computer program to feed it through and spit out an answer at the end. You can go back and see the votes and stuff, but it's hard for the public to know how that happens, and most of the time that happens kind of out of the view of the public. So that's a little bit about how the process works. Why is this not necessarily a good way to go forward? Number one, it's prone to errors. So one example that we like to point to, there was a 2022 school board race in Alameda County, California, where they used ranked choice voting. Actually, they certified the wrong candidate as the winner. And the only reason they realized this was because another group went back after the fact, looked at the votes, and we're talking 4 or 5 minutes afterwards, realized, hey, you guys certified the wrong winner here. It was actually this person. They said, oh, you know what? You're right. Sorry, we got that wrong. But the person certified has been doing the job for 6 months already. That person is in that position. You can see how pretty quickly, if that can happen in a very small local race, things can get hard to trace and hard to have much confidence in when you're talking about much larger races or numerous races on the ballot. So that's one, it's prone to errors. 2, it disenfranchises voters. Like I mentioned, if you don't rank every candidate in the race, if your preferred candidate, if your first choice candidate gets knocked out in the first round, they go to the second round. If you didn't have a second round, well, then your ballot is thrown out and it's not counted in that second round of voting. And that includes even if it goes all the way to the end and you just didn't put the one person you really could never vote for. Although, for many of us, I know that there's probably people we could never feel like we could morally vote for. Unfortunately, with ranked choice voting, you're put in a place of having to put that person on a piece of paper knowing that that vote might actually end up counting for that candidate. And if you don't put that down, your vote is liable to be thrown out and not counted at all, which is exactly what the left is claiming is happening right now with voter disenfranchisement. An example of this is a 2021 New York City mayoral race, and you may have followed this in the news at the time. It was one of the largest earlier ranked choice voting elections that they kind of went through, and the process was very publicized. So out of 750,000 ballots that were cast in that election, 140,000 were thrown out and not counted in the round that ended up determining the winner. I should have done the percentage. I'm not that good at math, but somebody can do that for us. It seems like it's probably 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 are thrown out. That's a very large percentage, and I think it's wrong for voters to be put in a position to either vote for people you don't want to vote for or not have your vote counted. To me, that sounds more like extortion than a democratic voting process. And that brings me to the last point here, which is not really the last point, but the last one I'll emphasize today, is that it undermines the democratic process. And it does that because it makes the system opaque, and we would argue on purpose. There are many different forms of ranked choice voting. It's called many different things. It could be final five voting or instant runoff. The rules can vary here and there, can vary race to race. Ultimately, to the average voter, it's very confusing. It violates the principle of one vote, one person, one vote, and it really puts us in a situation of not choosing the path we want to go down, really choosing a menu of options and saying, well, I'm voting for this person, but I may not actually be voting for this person. It really just goes against everything that we as Americans stand for when it comes to, no, I stand for principle, I stand for my values, and that's how I plan to vote. Ranked choice voting, unfortunately, does not allow that to take place. So those are just a few of the reasons why it's bad. Like I said, there are more, happy to talk more about it, but for the sake of time, I wanted to talk about some bills that are before the legislature this session in the Gold Zone. So the first one that I'll mention is SB 355, Senate Bill S 355. It was actually introduced yesterday, believe it or not, yesterday afternoon, and I believe it was Randy Robertson who introduced that bill. He's the sponsor. So that bill would ban ranked choice voting statewide across the state of Georgia. Excellent piece of legislation. We are fully in favor of that piece of legislation. And that is likely to be assigned to the Senate Ethics Committee, which is where they will begin the legislative process. They'll have hearings there. I would expect that process to probably be lively. So if this is an issue that you feel passionate about, and I hope you do, I hope you will consider going down to the legislature, testifying against ranked choice voting, or I should say in favor of SB 355. And the reason that bill is so important is because there are other bills out there and other efforts out there to expand ranked choice voting into Georgia, whether it be at the state level or at the municipal level, and then have it kind of expand from there. Another bill that was introduced last session is HB 200, which would allow municipalities to use ranked choice voting. Sounds innocuous enough. It sounds, well, local control, municipalities should be able to run the elections however they see fit. I understand that argument. I think that principle honestly should be applied more towards the administration of the election, not the overall system and how we cast votes in this country. The problem with it starting at the municipal level, though, is it's kind of like the camel's nose under the tent, right? You start it in one place, and their goal is to expand it everywhere. That's their stated goal. We've seen this in other states across the country. They don't just do it locally. Once they get it into a locality, they'll do it statewide. And once they do it statewide, they try to expand it elsewhere. There's now a nationwide push for ranked choice voting at every level of government possible, wherever it is politically possible. And so SB 355, the one to ban ranked choice voting, is a necessary step, unfortunately, to safeguard our election system as we have all known it our entire lives, and in fact, in the history of our country. So that's a very important bill to watch. Hope you'll support SB 355, and hope you'll oppose HB 200 if it were to move. HB 200 is in the House Governmental Affairs Committee, and we'll send out updates and stuff as things are moving so that you guys can stay up to date. That brings me to a good point I forgot to mention earlier. I have some sheets on the back table there where you signed in. If you're interested in becoming a Sentinel, and really that just means that you're wanting to get updates from us, action alerts, stay in the loop with things that are going on, fill out that half page back there and get that back to me before you leave. I'll be sure and plug you in so that you get those. But specifically with ranked choice voting, the best ways to take action are to contact your state senator and ask them to co-sponsor SB 355 if they haven't already, and ask for, obviously, for the Senate to pass it if they have. And then watch for action alerts from us, because I'll send those things out as it moves, as there are committee hearings that come up, urge you to testify and that sort of thing, urge you to get your friends and family yourselves to reach out to the elected officials as it's coming up for votes and that sort of thing. that's it on ranked choice voting. I'll take, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, I think, so I'll move on to education freedom. If you have questions, I hope you'll write them down so we can come back to them. I don't want to skip over anything or have you forget a thought, so maybe jot it down if you may not remember it later.
At 12:30, there's another question.
Yes, yep. So education freedom, many of you probably followed this last session with education savings accounts, and that's a bill that was passed by the Senate. It's SB 233. So what are education savings accounts for those who are not familiar? Basically, they allow parents to withdraw their children from public or charter schools, K through 12 schools, and get a portion of that state funding that was going to be spent in those schools to then be able to have an account that they control to be able to spend on other opportunities for their children education-wise. So these are things like tutoring services, education therapists, textbooks and curricular materials for home study, online classes, private school tuition, and more. I mean, you think of all of the possibilities of how you could educate your child. Education savings accounts really makes it the opposite of one size fits all as possible. It is kind of education a la carte for the child, right? Whatever works for them, the parent knows the child best. They're able to tailor that experience to them so that they are able to learn in whatever way is easiest for them to do, rather than just one size fits all public school or charter school or what have you. So that's what ESAs are. Do they work? The answer is overwhelmingly yes. So they've been tried in multiple states across the country, especially in Arizona, which has a long track record of them. They started ESAs back in the 1990s and have expanded them ever since. And last year, the year before, they went fully universal in the state so that anyone is eligible to use them. And people have been going crazy to try to get their hands on those, and thankfully people are able to use those widely. We've seen as education savings accounts are adopted, not just the scores and the achievement of the students who are using the ESAs improves, the scores of those in public schools where they left actually improve also. It really allows the system to work in a more efficient way. Think of like economies of scale, right? Like some people are better at some things than others. As schools are able to focus more time, energy, and funding on the students who are there, it makes sense that they're going to improve. Similarly, the people who are using the ESAs, it makes sense that if they learn in a different way and they're able to use those and get access to these other things, they're going to learn in a better way. So everyone is raised up by this policy. And it's a very effective way to get at that. And it actually ends up saving money the way that Georgia's bill goes about it. It would save the state money, contrary to what the other side would claim. Do Georgians want ESAs? And this is, I think, the key question politically. And the answer is resoundingly yes. A poll done by Yes Every Kid in July 2023 of likely general election voters. Yes. You're okay.
Very apropos for the moment.
Exactly. You can just keep it going if you want. Yeah. Exactly. So likely general election voters in Georgia, almost 63% of them are in favor of education savings accounts. Actually, only 15%, under 15% oppose, and only 7% are unsure. So it's really an overwhelmingly popular thing with parents especially. Those numbers for parents goes up to something more like 80% rather than 70% support among voters. And so I think it's key to point out this is not just something that's being pushed by one segment or anything like that. Parents are asking for this. They're begging for this in a lot of cases. And this is a ticket out of whatever may not be working for their child, and will really put the power back in the parents' hands and empower those children also to go out and learn. So do Georgians want them? Yes. I mentioned the bill. It's SB 233. It was sponsored by Greg Dolezal. It passed the Senate last session with every Republican voting yes, which honestly was a surprise to many who have worked on this issue for many years. The fact that it passed the Senate with every Republican voting yes shows that, hey, there's momentum. We've seen the momentum nationwide on this. We've seen other states really tackle this and say, yes, parents, you should be empowered to make the best decisions for your children. And thankfully, it looks like that's coming to Georgia. Fortunately, on the House side last year, it fell 6 votes short. So we were just so close to getting it passed, but not quite there. It's still alive this session. There were 16 Republicans who voted no. We need to flip 6 of those votes this year. It's a top priority of the legislature. Many legislators have been working basically since the end of last session up to today to try to figure out a way to get this across the finish line. And I'm happy to report it seems like we'll get there. It seems like it'll get across the finish line. But it's going to require our work also. It's kind of one of those things we should have hope, but we also have some work to do, if that makes sense. So I hope that you will reach out to your legislators. I believe everyone in this area voted for it, but it's important that they hear from you that you're in favor of this, because the other side is really energized against it. They are having, the teachers' unions are having teachers reach out and do all kinds of things and say all kinds of things to legislators to try to spook them away from doing this. So every voice of yours that is able to bolster the energy and support for this policy is definitely going to move the needle. Even if it's someone who already voted for it last session, they'll be able to tell their colleagues, hey, I'm still hearing about this issue. We have to get this done. That's going to be helpful at the end of the day. So on the action side of that, contact your state representatives, ask them to support education savings accounts and SB 233 this year, and talk to other people about the need for education freedom. I mean, this is an issue that doesn't just stop with ESAs. There are many different types of education freedom, and I think the goal is laudable in itself. We should be talking about the need for parents to be able to give their children the best opportunity possible. Last issue I'll mention today, and this is not to say this is the only other issue we're focused on in the legislature, but the last one we have time for today before questions is ESG, which you may have heard of. It's environmental, social, and governance policies. So ESG really started, I don't know the exact year, but corporations basically started pushing very liberal ideology, and specifically climate ideology, sometime in the last 5 or so years. I think the left realized they were never going to get their climate agenda passed legislatively via the democratic process. And so they then just went to the private sector and said, okay, well, how can we use this system to basically force this down everyone's throats, regardless of whether they want it, regardless of whether it's going to help or hurt anyone. Spoiler alert, it will hurt everyone. But ESG, a little bit more about it. Think of, on the environmental aspect of it, they are in favor of net zero by 20, I can't remember if it's 2050 or 2030. 2030. Basically, net zero carbon emissions across the board, which is unattainable, first of all. Can't be done in that time frame, or really, I would argue, in any time frame with any kind of foreseeable technology. That means no oil, no gas, solar subsidies, relying on solar and wind only for power. Look at how that's working out for Texas right now. They're not even only relying on wind and solar. They have a mix in their portfolio, and yet it got cold down there, and they're having rolling blackouts. Last year, they were without power for something like a week and a half in basically 0-degree weather. That'll become the norm if this is something that we pursue. But they do this via asset managers, via banks and insurance companies. They get these asset managers at banks and insurance companies to basically go in on a pact together and say, okay, we're only going to do business with people and invest funds according to people who are putting these goals into practice. Not just talking a good game, but actually making a plan and actually showing their work that they're doing this. It provides a profit incentives for companies to do this, even if they're, I shouldn't say profit, because it's really not profit to the shareholders. It's access to capital, which is a very different thing from profit. This completely disregards profit for stakeholders in the sake of what they claim is the overall good of climate.
A couple major cases right now. Shareholders are suing
other
companies, and they absolutely should.
As they should. Yep. Think of the social aspect being things like critical race theory, DEI, as we've seen in a lot of companies where people can't even call out anti-Semitism that's happened in the wake of October 7th massacre in Israel, transgender activities, things like that. And then governance, things like employee race quotas, compensation tied to ESG goals. In the news yesterday or the day before, United Airlines CEO is saying they're making all of their hires based mainly on the basis of race, and that's kind of it. They don't care about safety, they don't care about education necessarily. Maybe they're looking for people who have the right education, but their main overriding factor is race, and they're using quotas to do so, which on its face is illegal, by the way, but they're doing it anyway. So yes, lawsuits are very important. There's also a legislative approach to this that's important. I think there's no silver bullet solution to this problem. There's a large menu of options that we're going to need to use to get at this. Some are federal with antitrust legislation. Some are in the litigation front with lawsuits. Legislatively, some of those things that states can do are protect state pensions and investments. These are things like with the state retirement funds that the state maintains and has, requiring that they only invest those according to what's financial factors and not ESG or political factors, basically standing up for their fiduciary duty to the retirees. Protecting state economic interests with contracts, making sure they don't contract with anyone who's agreed to this pact, shoring up the electrical grid reliability, protecting charitable giving. Think of like institutional endowments like the university system and state institutions and agencies, and protecting the supply chain from things like forced labor, especially for electric vehicles. A shocking percentage of electric vehicle supply chains are including slave labor, unfortunately. And it's important for states to say, hey, we're not going to purchase those vehicles for this if you're using that. Again, it's not going to fix the problem, it's going to highlight it. There's been lots of great work done on this so far, and thankfully ESG funds you may have seen that people are investing in as individuals have absolutely tanked in the last 12 to 16 months. And it's just a sign that this is the wrong path. I know it's really kind of an in-the-weeds subject, but wanted to raise it for the reason there's an ESG bill that was passed last session, SB 266, passed the Senate, just requires a House vote. The House version is HB 481. I know you won't remember these bill numbers, but if you sign up, I'll be sure and get an email with all the stuff that I talked about today. Those will be coming through. I hope that we'll get those passed as well. That'll rely on you guys reaching out to your members too. And so stay in touch with us as that's happening, and we'll be sure to get you all the info you need to take action. Most importantly, spread the word about ESG, why it's bad, why you don't support it, and really get people to understand what's going on, because it's a very dangerous issue. And with that, the other issues that we're looking at in Georgia before we get to questions, just really quickly, defining sex. We touched on the gender transition surgery issue last session. But defining sex in state law is incredibly important for a number of reasons. Countering China is another one. Things like land use in the state, things like state contracts, universities having Confucius Institutes and things like that, lobbying at the state level from Chinese nationals and things like that. And then lastly, preventing illegal immigration. there's a list of things that we can do as a state to disincentivize that, and states should take the lead because we know the federal government's not going to. And with that,